The storm arrived earlier than anyone predicted, brushing against the windows with restless fingers. Nate Harlan stood in the kitchen, holding a bowl of popcorn that he and his sister Lena had planned to share during a movie. She was upstairs finishing homework, leaving him with the uneasy silence that always came with heavy rain. Their house sat at the edge of a wooded field, and the nearest neighbor was a short walk away. But on nights like this, it felt much farther. Nate placed the popcorn on the coffee table, reached for the remote, and froze when he heard the first knock. It was a soft one, almost unsure of itself, and it came from somewhere near the side door by the laundry room. He strained to listen, wondering if it had been a branch or something carried by the wind. The second knock was louder, unmistakably deliberate. He called up the stairs for Lena, but she didn't respond, probably had headphones on. Nate walked slowly toward the laundry room and turned on the hall light. The warmth of the bulb comforted him for only a moment before he saw the long, thin shadow on the frosted glass of the side door. The shape stood perfectly still, tilted slightly toward the window like it was listening for movement inside. Nate stepped back. "Lena," he called again, louder this time. The shadow shifted, not forward, just slightly to the side, as if adjusting posture. Nate's heart fluttered sharply. He thought of reaching for the knob to check the lock, but something deep in his instincts begged him not to get too close. A quiet voice came from outside. "Hello," it said. The tone was low, almost gentle, but there was nothing familiar about it. "I need a little help." Nate swallowed and backed farther into the kitchen. "Lena," he shouted, and this time she answered from upstairs, annoyed. "What?" she said. "Someone's at the door." Her footsteps came quickly down the hall, and she appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a concerned expression. She peered down the hall, toward the laundry door. The shadow was gone. "Are you sure?" she asked. Nate nodded. They both walked toward the hallway slowly. The light glowed softly on the empty frosted glass. Lena locked the door, even though it was already locked, then pulled Nate back into the living room. "It's probably Mr. Fenwick," she said. "Maybe he needs something." That wasn't his voice. Before Lena could reply, both siblings flinched at the sound of a new knock. This one came from the front porch. It was the same rhythm as before, slow and steady. Lena moved toward the front window, but Nate grabbed her arm. They approached together and gently lifted the curtain. Rain blurred the porch, but a tall figure stood at the edge of the light, facing directly toward the door. The moment they looked, the figure stepped backward into the darker space, beyond the railing. Nate, single quotes, S chest tightened. "He moved, Lena, he moved." She gently pulled the curtain closed. "Okay, we are calling Mr. Fenwick." They hurried to the kitchen phone. Lena dialed, but the line crackled as if the storm had damaged it. She tried again. The same static hum filled the receiver. Then something tapped against the upstairs window above them. Not a branch scraping by accident. A precise knock. 3 soft taps. Nate knew exactly what window that was. His bedroom faced the old oak tree. Its branches stretched wide and nearly touched the house, but no one could climb it easily. And even if they did, the distance to the window was too far for anyone to reach. A chill crept over Nate. "Lena, no one can be outside that window." The knock came again, and this time a shadow moved across the thin curtain upstairs. Someone was waiting above them, watching, patient and entirely unbothered by the storm. They weren't alone in the house, and whoever stood outside wanted them to know. Reed Caven loved quiet places. That was the main reason he agreed when Tala suggested they spend a weekend at her family's old mountain cabin. It sat at the edge of a pine forest where fog rolled through the trees like slow-moving ghosts. The air was clean, the world felt quiet, and the two of them had planned to spend the evening playing old board games and drinking cheap cocoa. They arrived just before dusk, carrying bags from the car up the creaking steps. The cabin roof sloped low, and a thin porch light glowed weakly, barely cutting through the thickening mist. Reed felt the cold sink into his jacket as he helped Tala bring in the groceries. She smiled at him with a tired warmth, grateful to be away from campus life for a night inside. The cabin looked older than he remembered. The living room smelled of pine, sap, and dust, and the windows were framed by heavy curtains that barely moved even when the wind pressed against the glass. Reed shrugged off the feeling of unease and focused on unpacking. "Fog's early tonight," Tala remarked, peeking outside. "It feels heavier than usual." Reed joined her and looked through the window. The fog lay against the cabin in thick waves, as if something pressed it forward from within the forest. He tried to convince himself it was normal. They spent the next few hours quietly. Reed cooked noodles. Tala sat cross-legged at the table reading old journal entries she found in a drawer. The night deepened, and the fog grew even denser, crawling up the porch steps like slow rising tide. It was almost 10 when Reed went to throw away some scraps outside. He opened the cabin door, stepped onto the porch, and stopped immediately. A delicate shiver ran through him. Someone stood at the very edge of the porch light. The figure was tall and extremely thin. Long dark hair hung in damp strands over a pale face. The woman didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood with one arm raised in a slow wave, as if greeting a friend she had been waiting for. Reed's breath tightened. "Tala," he whispered without turning his head. The woman took one small step closer. The fog parted around her feet like something was following her outline. Reed backed into the cabin and shut the door more quickly than he meant to. Tala stood near the kitchen, frowning at his expression. "What happened?" she asked. "Someone is standing outside," he said, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. Tala hurried to the window by the porch. Reed followed, though part of him didn't want to look again. The glass was coated in condensation, but they could see a faint silhouette through the blur. The woman remained in the same position, only now her face was tilted toward the window, as if she sensed where they stood. Tala whispered. "Did she say anything?" Reed shook his head. "She just waved." They both stepped back from the window at the same time. Neither of them wanted to turn their backs on it, yet neither wanted to stare too long. A minute passed, then another. "Maybe she's lost," Tala said half-heartedly. "We should call someone," Reed replied. The cell phone signal was weak, but Tala managed to dial the ranger station. Before anyone could answer, the line dissolved into static, and the call dropped. She tried again. The same result then. From outside, a voice floated through the fog. "Reed." Tala and Reed froze. The voice sounded exactly like Tala. Not similar, not close, identical. Reed single quotes, as stomach twisted. He stared at Tala, who stared back at him with a pale, frightened expression. Neither of them moved. But the voice outside called again. "Reed, come here. I need help." There was no mistaking it now. The tone, the inflection, the slight catch in the throat, everything was the same as Tala's voice, and it echoed across the fog like something practiced it long enough to make it perfect. Reed shook his head slowly. "That isn't you." Tala swallowed hard. "Don't go near the door." The knocking began then, soft at first, a single tap on the wood. Then another, deliberate and spaced out, as if the visitor wanted to savor each sound. Tap, tap, tap. Reed felt the pressure in his chest grow heavier with each knock. He imagined the pale woman standing with her face pressed close to the wood, eyes opened too wide, mouth pulled into a smile. The knocking stopped, then a shadow shifted near the living room window. Reed turned in time to see her face appear through the glass for just a second before the fog swallowed her again. Her eyes were open, unblinking. Her hand rested lightly on the window pane. Something scratched gently along the wood frame beside the glass, tracing the edges as if learning the shape of the house. "She is not trying to get inside," Tala whispered. "She is trying to get us outside." The fog thickened once more, and the woman's footsteps circled the cabin slowly. She had all night to wait, and she knew they had nowhere else to go. Joe Moran always returned home late. His postal route stretched across several rural neighborhoods, and some evenings went long when deliveries piled up. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the sun had usually dipped below the woods behind his house, leaving only the dim porch light to keep the night from swallowing everything. One particular evening, the air felt strangely heavy. Clouds pressed low across the sky, and the stretch of backyard behind his house seemed darker than usual. He parked, grabbed his bag, and walked up the path toward the back door. Halfway there, he caught something in the corner of his vision. A figure stood at the far end of his wooden fence. Joel stopped cold. The figure didn't move. It stood so still that it almost looked carved, like an old statue someone had placed there without telling him. He blinked hard, thinking maybe exhaustion was bending the shadows into shapes. But when he opened his eyes, the figure was still there. Its head tilted slightly toward him. The fence was old and weathered, stretching from one side of the yard to the other. Joel had never seen anyone standing there before, not even kids playing pranks. The figure's stillness unsettled him more than anything else. No shifting, no swaying, no adjusting posture. Just watching. Joel hurried to the back door and slipped inside, locking it behind him. He turned on the kitchen light and let out a shaky breath. Maybe it was someone passing through. Maybe it was a hunter who got turned around. He tried to convince himself the explanation was simple. When he peeked through the blinds, the figure was gone. That should have calmed him, but it didn't. Instead, dread crawled up his spine because the yard now looked too empty. The fence line was swallowed in shadow, but the absence felt intentional, as if something had simply stepped aside. Joel grabbed his phone and considered calling his neighbor, Dania, who lived a short walk away. She had a habit of sitting on her porch late at night, reading and keeping an eye on the street. Maybe she'd seen something. Before he could dial, someone knocked on the front door. A light, uneven knock, carefully spaced. Joel froze. It wasn't the back door, where he'd seen the figure last. It was the front, where no one should have been able to reach so quickly. He swallowed and stepped closer, listening. Another knock, a little louder, slightly off rhythm, like the person wasn't used to knocking. Joel's heartbeat thudded harder with each sound. He didn't open the door. Instead, he quietly lifted the living room curtain just enough to peek outside. No one stood on the porch. The knocking happened again, even though he saw nothing. It came from the wood right in front of him. He staggered back, heartbeat crackling in his ears. He backed away from the door until he reached the middle of the living room. His phone buzzed in his pocket, nearly making him jump. The caller ID showed Dania's name. He answered quickly. "Joel," she said, her voice unsteady. "Are you home?" "I just got in," he replied quietly. "Why?" She swallowed, the sound faint through the receiver. "I can see someone near your shed." Joel turned slowly toward the back of the house. The shed sat just beyond the fence line. He hadn't even looked in that direction since coming inside. He moved toward the sliding back door, but stopped several feet short. He didn't want to get too close. "Describe what you see," he whispered. Danya hesitated. It's crouched, not standing like before, and I think it's looking toward your house." Joel's breath stopped for a moment. "Before," he repeated. "You saw it earlier too." "Yes," Danya replied. "It was standing by your fence for a long time." The phone crackled. Then her voice dropped lower. "Joel, it just stood up." Joel backed away from the sliding door. He moved until his shoulders touched the hallway wall. Something rustled outside, closer than he expected. A soft scrape along the back door frame. Then a light tap, almost polite. He felt every muscle in his body lock in place. Dania's voice trembled through the phone. "Joel, it isn't at the shed anymore." The tapping on the back door grew slightly firmer. Something pressed against the glass, creating a faint shape of a head leaning in. Joel didn't want to look, but he couldn't bring himself to move either. The faint pressure of the presence on the other side of the door felt wrong, too patient, too aware of him. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched for several long seconds. Then the front door knocked again. Joel felt cold wash over him. The creature moved between exits. It knew he was inside. It knew he was watching, and it wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting, waiting for him to open a door, waiting for him to make the first mistake. He stepped back from all windows, all doors, standing in the center of the living room as his phone slipped from his hand. He stared into the quiet darkness around him. Outside, someone's footsteps circled the house, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The figure had all night, and it knew eventually Joel would need to sleep.